history about who we are as a company. So the sort of the idea for BMF was an idea of a professor here in Boston at MIT named Nick Fang. And Nick was working on a variant to stereolithography called that is often called pulse or projection microstereolithography. And he had been working on the technology for a few years and decided to start a company a few years ago. One, to commercialize the technology, but just as importantly, he recognized that there was really a gap maybe in the 3D printing market between things like two-photon technology, which really Nanoscribe has been the pioneer in, and I'll call it the sort of more traditional DLP technologies that are available from companies like EnvisionTech or Carbon or Origin or a few other companies like that, that there was a gap. And to really be able to get, I call it millimeter-sized parts sort of at a micron tolerance. And so that was really the idea behind the company when it started. And so the company actually started in Shenzhen in China in 2017. A small group really worked on the technology and developed it, introduced it to first customers in Asia in 2018 and 2019. And then I think that group, including Professor Fang, realized, hey, this is going pretty well. There seems to be the technology works pretty well, and two, we're getting some interest in the field. But if we were really going to think about it being a global company serving lots of different market needs, then we probably need to have much more of a global presence. And so I got involved in 2019, spent a fair amount of time in China, and we really sort of launched the company globally in February 2020, right before the pandemic. So, and since that time, we've been out there talking to customers and building business, and our market thesis, I think, was correct. That there is this relatively large opportunity in between I'll call it the nanotechnologies or sub-micron technologies and the sort of technologies that are typically maybe at the 50 to 100 micron resolution technologies. And I think we were generally right about the markets the markets that needed that. So we sell our systems into electronics, optics, and photonics, specialty measuring devices. It's not MEMS per se, but certainly small electromechanical parts. Microfluidics, we have an expert here on the panel, and I'll leave that to him to talk about that with Dr. Fulch. But and then medical device, that there's lots of applications that are emerging. And so really the theme behind our company is this concept of helping to enable miniaturization. There's lots of reasons to miniaturize, whether it's in electronics or in medical device. And one of the constraints over the years is as I'll call it the active component, like the chip or the lens or the piezo sensor, as those get smaller and smaller, one of the challenges is that the packaging, in some ways, whether it's the chip packaging or the lens holder or the plastic really that surrounds a lot of these active components, they also need to get smaller. And as things get smaller in manufacturing, whether doing injection molding or machining or stamping or whatever you're doing, it gets more expensive. And so that's really what we are about, really all about as a company. So again, we talk about this a lot, that really convergence of technology trends of taking additive manufacturing, which has really been around for 30 years. And I've been fortunate to have a lot of my career be about that. I've been in 3D printing longer than most. So starting almost about 25 years ago with another MIT technology, which it was a company called Z Corporation. And that was in the late 1990s. And a lot of the technology, what's nice about 3D printing is it certainly has evolved and proven to be a valuable prototyping tool. And that's in a lot of ways still very much the killer app. That having a machine, whether it's a $5,000 machine or $500,000 machine in your facility or on your campus, and to be able to get something relatively quickly for prototyping, development, testing, communication has proven to be valuable. But what's really emerged over the last, I'm going to say 5 to 10 years, is the technologies are getting better, the materials are getting better, the costs are coming down, and it's becoming more and more viable for production applications. And so it's not only in prototyping, but more and more it's being used for end part production. And so really what our company is about is this convergence of technology trends of taking additive manufacturing and introducing it into markets that really care about making parts smaller, miniatures, making things miniature. There's a lot of our early customers are very happy using it for prototyping, but because they couldn't use it, they couldn't find a technology before to be able to make prototypes at that tolerance or at that scale that they were really looking for. But just as importantly, I would say about a third of our customers have an eye toward production, of qualifying the process, qualifying the materials, qualifying the quality system that they need to produce parts at scale. Just a real quick, I'm not going to get into a lot of details of how the technology works, but we call it PULSE, projection microstereolithography. Stereolithography was invented by Chuck Hull 30 plus years ago, where you're just using a vat of resin and you're curing that resin with a light source. It started with a laser. 10 plus years after that, maybe the first DLP machines came out. I think EnvisionTech was maybe one of the first ones to commercialize DLP onto vats of resin. And what Pulse is just a variant of that. So we're using a DLP light source, but what's different about our technology is we then have high precision optics in between, and then we have high precision movement in the XYZ. And it's important for two reasons. One is people care about resolution. People care about being able to make a certain size feature or have very crisp edges. And there's some markets that only care about resolution, and maybe they don't care much about dimensional accuracy. And a good example of that is the jewelry market. So the jewelry market has very much adopted 3D printing. It's a really good fit for that industry. They really care about resolution. They're generally not measuring things. So, but when you get into industrial markets like electronics and medical device, you need resolution and you need dimensional accuracy. And so we're able to control both of those things with the optics, high precision movement, software, and really pulling all those things together in a package. Probably some of these presentations will show things at scale, and this is a whole presentation about the whole webinar about microfabrication, but I use this slide so people can get a sense for the size of things that we're talking about. This is an example of a glaucoma stent. You can see it's about 2.5 millimeters is the largest dimension. You can see it compared to a penny there. And from right to left down below, you can see what's possible with some of the other technologies on the market, sort of at the macro scale. When you're printing at 50 microns, this might be something like a Formlabs machine or some other technology. You can print it, but it's probably not at the resolution that you need. And as you move right to left, when you get down to 10 micron resolution or 2 micron resolution, where I know, some of the nanoscribe products certainly can get to that resolution and below, you start to be able to really resolve the features that you need at that scale. So, these are the types of parts where you could fit, thousands of them in a small cup. And so that's the type of scale that we're talking about for this application. So I thought I'd walk through just a couple examples, just pictures, and try to get across to what people are doing with our technology. So this is a really good one. So this is an endoscope shell or endoscope tip. So people know what an endoscope is used to usually stick in your body and explore. The tip, which is used to house electronics, a camera, lighting, maybe sensors, is a pretty small part. You can see some of the dimensions there, but it's also complex. So from either side, you have a lot of complexity in the geometry. So it's difficult to mold. It's expensive to mold. And so this is a really good application for 3D printing. And the technical requirements, it's interesting. People ask me on the material side, are the technical requirements more difficult in medical device, or are they more difficult in other industries? And we have an interesting perspective on it. Certainly from a regulatory point of view, in medical, it's a steep hill. So there's lots of things that need to be done to meet all the regulatory requirements. But from an actual technical point of view, in a lot of ways, medical device parts in some ways are easier, especially if they are consumable. So this is a consumable part. So you're using it once. So you're using it on a patient for 15 minutes and you're throwing it away. So you have that regulatory hurdle, but you don't have the requirement that it needs to last for 5 years that you might have in an electronic device. It doesn't need to be flame retardant. So we deal with both of these challenges, both the technical challenges and the regulatory challenges. But in a lot of ways in the medical device world, especially if it's a consumable product, that technical challenge is increasingly less of a problem to be able to develop something that would fit the customer's application. This is the glaucoma stent application. And then what we see both for the eye and the ear, people are looking at different components and different devices. But then just as importantly, they're looking for the tool that may insert that device. Also has to have the same level of sort of tolerance and resolution that the part itself needs to have. So lots of interest and adoption here in both the eye and the ear portions of the market. Implantables, very much a growing space, very much lots of interest in both implantables that are permanent or semi-permanent, but also bioresorbable. So there's a whole sort of field of work out there in developing these materials and then getting down to the resolution and accuracy and precision that people need for some of these applications. I'll take this time to talk a little bit about the world of materials that we live in. We're dealing with generally acrylate photosensitive materials. We develop a bunch of our own. But what has also happened in the last 5 years in 3D printing, which has been, I think, very much a positive, is that there are lots of different companies working on materials that for lots of different applications. And so there's lots of partnerships. You know, we partner with a lot of materials companies. Customers are partnering with a lot of materials companies. In a lot of ways, that has significantly moved forward, I think, the industry. For prototyping, I would argue it doesn't matter that much. Right, as long as you've got a part that sort of like plastic and sort of looks like what you need and serves that need, it doesn't matter that much. But in an end part application, the material needs to match up as best as possible with what's currently being used, either with molding or machining or some other process. Microneedle arrays, another interesting application. The idea for microneedle arrays has been around for a long time. So this is not a new idea. It's been around for certainly more than 10 years. I was watching the documentary. It wasn't a documentary, a show on Hulu this week about Theranos and the saga at Theranos, and they were showing microfluidics, they were showing microneedle arrays, and that's 15 years ago at this point. But what has happened, in some ways because of the pandemic, there's much more of a wave of developing these types of technologies, because the world, I think, has discovered it's pretty hard to immunize billions of people pretty quickly. So, and maybe that is the world that we have to look forward to going, in future years, that health systems and governments and are going to need to find ways to deploy immunization technologies in a much more scalable way. Microfluidic chips. I won't talk too much about it because we've got an expert here on the panel, and let him talk about it. But this idea of microfluidic chips has been around for a number of years. 3D printing is a good way to do it. It very much can capture the geometry more effectively than a lot of the other approaches of bonding and embossing and etching, and that's a tough process. It takes a long time. I think the challenge in microfluidic chips is getting the materials to be compatible with what people really need. A lot of our customers will look at our geometries and say, hey, that looks fantastic. Can you make it out of quartz? Well, we can't quite make it out of quartz yet. So, those are things that we work on. So I think what we find with our microfluidic customers is it serves a lot of customers for prototyping needs. It serves some customers for actual diagnostic needs. And then, we're always working on materials to try to fill that out and satisfy more customers. And then I'll talk to just electromechanical components. So we're talking about drug delivery devices, pumps, sensors that are all getting smaller and smaller, but need to be either located on the skin or are inside the body and need to have all the requirements that a machine part or molded part would need in terms of properties, and it would need but the thing here is about scale and being able to do it cost effectively. If we often, lots of people in the 3D printing industry, whether it's in medical device or something else, or when they think about production, they're comparing a current technology, molding or machining or stamping or something else. And they're always doing the math, right? If I'm going to mold it, it would cost me this much. If I'm going to 3D print it, it costs this much. If you're going to do hundreds of millions of parts, 3D printing is probably not yet there, and arguably it will, be a long way to be scalable to meet that type of volume. At the other end of the spectrum, probably the number one industry that makes the most sense for end parts is dental, right? Because every dental application is one part. Everybody's different, and that's why it's really moved into that place. But what we see in medical device is that sort of happy medium in between, where we're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of parts. And when you're talking about that scale, that works pretty well. So I'll sort of end with a production example here. This is one of these endoscope tips. And this is on one of our current machines. It's our 10 micron machine. So you can't make millions of parts a month, but you can make 10,000 to 10 to 15,000 parts a month on a machine. And if you think about the cost there, that comes down to about 30 cents a part, that starts to get into the range is what's attractive when people are starting to think about using this for a production application. And I'll finish there. So thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about BMF, our website here is below. So it's bmf3d.com. Again, we have locations in Boston, we have locations in Shenzhen, we have locations in the UK and Japan to serve interest of our customers. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, John. That was fantastic. As a great first presentation, really laid out the landscape of this whole little industry here. One question from Thomas Dubois. I think you touched upon it. It says, what resolution can you get with microfluidic